This is Rough Drafts Welcome,
the podcast where you can mess up, and we can too.
I'm Sachiko.
And I'm Erin.
And together with the editors at Salt and Sage Books,
we're changing the face of storytelling, one rough draft at a time.
We're glad you're here. Let's get started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Rough Drafts Welcome. Sachiko and I are so excited to chat with you today. How are you doing, my dear?
I am doing okay. How are you?
We're here. We're alive. It's sunny outside. I mean, I'm feeling a little stretched thin, and for so many reasons. And that's honestly, I wasn't intentionally trying to segue into the topic, but this is what we're going to be talking about today. In our notes of what we're going to talk about today, we have this question.
Over too much bread. I'm sorry. Go on.
Yes, thank you, Bilbo. I feel like the thing that we had written down that we wanted to talk about today was, how do you make art when things are falling apart around you? And in thinking about how we're going to talk about this, I found a song. And so I want to read you some of the lyrics because I feel like it just so perfectly encapsulates the whole crux of this question, I guess. So it's a Florence and the Machine song called Free. And towards the end, she says, "Is this how it is? Is this how it's always been? To exist in the face of suffering and death and somehow still keep singing." And I watched a music video that goes along with the story, and she recorded it in the Ukraine. And this came out, when was it? I don't remember. But it was in 2022, so golly, it's been years now. But it was right when the war in Ukraine had just, not just started, but it was going on longer than we had all initially thought that it was gonna go. And just this sense of, how do you keep being a creative person while also being aware of what's happening around you? And I think we can talk about this in a macro level and also a micro level, because I mean, man, we've both gone through situations in our personal lives that have been the world falling apart.
Well, and I can hear in that there's two different approaches. Well, not two different approaches, but there's sort of a survivor guilt component of, how can I be creating art when other people are suffering so much? But then also, how can I create art when I'm suffering so much? When I'm ground zero. Mm-hmm. And so what do we do? I mean, is it okay to paint our pretty things when we are sitting in the middle of rubble? And the short answer is absolutely. Yeah. I'm a big fan of survival, and I think that survival can be really messy and everything but, succumbing to.
I am also a big fan of survival.
Well, I think that it's something that we embrace in theory, we embrace in the abstract, but in particular, survival is really, really messy. Survival is often not the ideal. It's sometimes anything but the ideal, and it can be highly maladaptive in the long run, which I think is, a lot of us are just, let's get through, and then we're going to unpack it in a few years in therapy or in physical therapy or whatever. So I know from experience, in the middle of survival, because everything is just, how do we keep going? It can feel very morally gray almost. And so it's easy to get stuck and wonder, well, what's the right thing for me to do right now? I mean, there's almost an aspect of survival that feels performative, like you have to perform a proper amount of running around, screaming, with waving your hands over your head so that people know you're properly, I don't know, being damaged in the right visible way, or that you're doing that you're properly responding.
So that people will still believe you.
Right, because if you're still creating, there are a lot of people out there who kind of treat that like cosmic creative welfare. They're
like, what do you mean you went through this really horrible thing? You wrote a book during it, or you were still painting throughout the whole thing, or look at all these beautiful quilts that you made. look at all this gorgeous whatever you created. Like, okay, you're going through this horrible thing, but I'm still seeing like all the beautiful meals that you're making,
So you must
or that you're posting, or whatever.
They're not understanding. And then on the flip side, there's also the expectation of, well, I can still create when things are hard. Why can't you? I remember when I was on bed rest with one of my babies, and this was a rainbow baby. I had lost her older brother at 22 weeks. He died. And so when this baby, when I was going into preterm labor, I didn't want to lose this baby too. So there was a lot of emotional weight when I went on bed rest to try to save her life. And for whatever reason, and also just because when I'm pregnant and I'm gestating, like it's almost like I can just look at a wall and just gestate. And that's where my brainwaves are. There was a lot of pressure from people. Well, you're on bed rest. Why aren't you writing a novel? And I think people didn't understand that my brain at that time, I couldn't even commit to a 60-minute TV show. Like I could watch half-hour sitcoms, but I could not watch an hour-long drama. And so I wasn't able to do what most people see as creative work then, which, I was obviously creating a baby and I was creating survival for both of us. And so maybe there's something to add there too, that sometimes when we're creating in survival mode, what we're creating is survival. That is the most creative and resourceful thing we can be engaging in. And it doesn't look like a novel every time. Sometimes it just looks like we're still getting up in the morning.
Mm-hmm. 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 So I think maybe our first point here is that if you are going through your own chaotic, whatever it happens to be, your own falling apart, like just on a personal level, and I just as though it's small, but I think it can be really easy to look at large, grand scale wars and catastrophes and natural disasters and feel like, oh, my own small thing doesn't count in the same way. But I think if you were to think about it just on like a neurological level, and I'm meaning like, okay, I'm speaking so clearly from my own experience here, because I have been lucky enough to not have ever been in a large scale natural disaster. I don't know what that is. But when you are observing from the outside and you're saying, I can see this horrible thing is happening, and then I have my own thing happening too, and how do I balance both of those things? I think if you were to look at your nervous system, it's probably responding similarly to both, as far as they both feel like a threat to survival. Only I think you're spot on that one of them comes like tinged with this guilt. And then if you're having your own personal crisis, especially against the backdrop of a greater crisis, and I'm going to use greater as in terms of like broader, affecting a large group of people, that it can be really easy to feel like you shouldn't talk about your own, or you shouldn't have your own, or whatever it is. But so anyway, the whole point I was trying to make is that it's deeply, deeply, deeply important to understand what is going to keep you personally alive through that thing. That nobody should be telling you when you are fighting for your life, oh, but why aren't you painting? Oh, but why aren't you writing a book? Oh, but I thought you were working on a book of poetry. Oh, I thought da 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 da, whatever it happens to be. That is it possible to create those things through trauma and difficulty? Absolutely. And we're going to talk about how we both managed to do that. But simultaneously, if you do not have room for that, like there is no shame in that. And anyone who would shame you about it should be quiet.
You and I were just talking right before we started the episode that basically the theme of this season is that we're addressing writing scrupulosity, because there is just a host of you're supposed to be.
Would you define scrupulosity? Because I learned about it from you. I'd never heard about it before we started chatting about all the things.
Right. So I'm coming at scrupulosity from both an diagnosed with OCD sense and also a high demand religion experience sense. That it's the sense of there is one right way to be. It's a very narrow ideal of perfection. It's strewn with rules, that there is an invisible judge that you are always spotlighted in front of and that you have to perform for. That mistakes are unforgivable. That you never have an off day, downtime, an excuse. It's almost, I feel like a lot of self-loathing is almost this prophylactic. It's like almost a self-defense against the scrupulosity, because it's easier for me to hate myself first and get in the front of the line. I just want to cut in front.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, keep going.
Well, that could be the intersection of scrupulosity and art, rejection, sensitive dysphoria, whatever. But I definitely, thinking about what you said, I feel like I've almost had an opposite experience in terms of trauma, because the creative expectations I had where people were like, well, why aren't you producing more? Why aren't you writing more? When I was struggling with really abusive church leaders and an abusive marriage. And I mean, part of that was I was obligated to make it look okay, which takes a lot of energy. But my participation in the why am I not producing more that people can see and enjoy, that took a lot of bandwidth. Just that whole sort of shame dog paddling. Because I didn't understand the difference until I was in a car accident and I was concussed and had a TBI, and everybody's like, yeah, you just sit down. And I saw what a relief it was for me to have something where I had to survive it, but it was outside me, Nobody is going to morally shame me for having been in a car accident or having a tornado take my house apart.
Yeah.
These are acts of God. Like, they can blame God, or they can blame the weatherman, or they can blame the uninsured driver who rear-ended me. But they're not telling me it's because I failed to be smart, creative, strong, whatever. Whereas other things, I think that's almost harder, the long-term invisible things where we're really trying to carry through, and people don't always see that, but they do see a lack of productivity, or they see productivity and they make assumptions about how our inner life is going.
Yeah.
And
I saw you did this thing. I thought you were having a really hard time.
Oh, you must be fine. Can you do this thing for me? Yeah.
I'm thinking about what you said about self-loathing being such a crucial part to the whole performative aspect of it. Not to just like be all on songs today, but here's another one. It's called Everybody Supports Women by Sophie Isella. And it, just fair warning, if you're going to listen to it, it's going to break your heart a little bit. And there's this line in there where she says, your ambition is swallowable if you tell the story right. Say that you hate yourself and self-criticize.
Yes.
You're fine if you can hate yourself out loud, especially, and I think this is especially with women and people who are assigned female at birth. My brain was like, AFAB, say AFAB. And I was like, I suddenly don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it. Assigned female at birth, AFAB. That is AFAB, right? You say AFAB.
I've heard it AFAB. I'm willing to please correct us.
Yeah, if we're wrong, please let us know, because suddenly I'm doubting myself about the pronunciation of that.
Trans or non-binary friends.
Anyway, sorry, I'm not meaning to anyway what you were saying. Anyway, off of my own like little side rabbit hole there. The idea that you have to be like, well, I finally wrote a book, but like, it's not that great. But like, it would mean a lot to me if you guys would come and do it for like little old me, who's just like kind of pathetic and small. And we have a cultural script for that.
Right.
We have a cultural script for like, oh, this poor pathetic little woman. And I'm meaning pathetic, like, oh, she makes us feel things. Oh, like this infantilization that comes along with it, that when I say like, we've been having a really hard time, like with my kids, they have really been struggling. And I have written this book. Just literally, if I'm like posting on Instagram or on Facebook or wherever to my friends, where one of my posts will be like, I'm struggling with this thing. And then the next post would be, I have written a book. That so much of the conversation then turns into, oh my gosh, you made this thing amidst like this really difficult time in your life. You poor sweet baby. So
there is a lot of things. Okay, so here's the connection I'm seeing. There is a hugely performative aspect to creativity, especially if we're doing something that we want to have consumed by others, or that we want others to.
It's performative, like by
Right.
nature, right?
And people are always they're always gonna project meaning or thoughts about us on whatever we've created. Story, a painting, a quilt, whatever, a situation, a child. But they also do the same thing. There's also that performative aspect and people projecting things onto it when it comes to our feelings. And I think that people, in my experience, survival's messy because people like winners. And they want to see winners creatively, but they also, and they want to see winners in personal life, and they're really uncomfortable with struggle, and so I found that if I share something, people almost need to be like, well, I'm going to come in with advice and fix it. I want to come in with advice. I'm going to fix your story and tell you what's wrong. And I'm going to also fix your life. And creating through survival sometimes means an ongoing grief or even fun, a gallows humor about how some things aren't fixable yet. Or maybe we don't even understand what it is that we need to fix.
I think we lose so much by having most of our interactions be over a screen. And I don't mean to be like in my generation, but I do have like within my living memory where I didn't have the ability to reach out to people via phone or text or message. And that the way that I would share, like, I'm in the middle of this really hard thing, but like something funny just happened. And it's bad funny, but I'm laughing so hard. It's like I would call somebody on the phone, or I would go to their house, or I would invite them over, or like, I remember living that kind of a life. Yeah. And in that moment, for the most part, you're interacting with people who are safe to have that sort of a response with. But like if I post gallows humor on Facebook, for example, the number of people who are going to come in who are not necessarily I would invite you over to like laugh with me about this horrible, hard thing. Or like I would call you to be like, okay, I know that we're like struggling, but I have to tell you about the most funny thing that just happened. They're not necessarily the same group of people. And so there is this, for me, I feel this real urge to like, when I have created a thing, I feel like I have to have a disclaimer on it. To be like, I know you guys are normally like, I know I've been posting a lot about like how things are really hard, but I want you to laugh with me about this because it made me laugh. And like, here's a poem I wrote, or here's a funny picture I took, or here's a watercolor painting that I did that's like truly terrible. And isn't that so funny? But it's like, I have to tell people up front how I want them to react.
Oh yeah. Otherwise you get a lot of people who are like, well, she's having a hard time. That wears me out. I'm going to give a care react and scroll on.
Yeah. Or they come in and they're like, well, did you know that if you just instead did this and this and this and this and this thing, that then, all your problems would be fixed. And I'm like, thank you. I'm not going to join your MLM.
So I'm thinking of all the different things we've had to create while we are in our own personal ground zero. And so there's questions of, are we talking about how writing a poem will make you feel better? Or are we talking about what if your livelihood depends on creating things and you really aren't feeling it because everything is crap? But how do you still continue putting one foot in front of the other and show up with your copywriting, with your ghostwriting, with your editing, there's a lot of, I think this is especially topical for a lot of our freelancers, especially people who come from marginalized experiences.
I'm glad that you brought that up because a lot of my own personal experience is definitely more I'm creating this because it is giving me a sense of like internal release, and less that I'm creating this because I need to show up in a creative manner in order to continue to feed my family. Yeah, it's different. It's different. And how do you put one foot in front of the other when it's either that or like you can't pay for gas?
Yeah. I mean, if I had to give practical advice to other freelancers, it would be make sure that, when you have a good moment, when you have a strong moment, when maybe you have somebody body doubling you, or you've got something planned after so that you can spend a little bit of energy looking at how you do your admin work and your contracts. Just make sure that you have set a standard that's very clear that your clients is okay with. That is something that you can show up and do when you are having a mediocre day. like just mediocre, okay effort that is still fulfilling what your client needs. And I mean, I'm not saying let's do crappy, and hey, potential clients, I'm not saying anybody wants to do a crappy job, but there has to be a medium point where we're not burning people out who are already crispy ashes.
Yeah. You've used the phrase before, it's like a low tide expectation.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially for those people out there who are neurodivergent. There are things that we can do in a burst of energy that are not long-term maintainable. Like our overall average is okay. But that overall average hides really huge, sine waves of effort and output. And so maybe the first thing we need to do is just change expectations for ourselves and for the people with whom we are obligated or that we wish to share our creative efforts with. Change those expectations. Like it doesn't. I know that my expectation of things needing to be good or perfect means sometimes I haven't even started doing creative things in the middle of things when I could have and I wanted to, but because I knew I wasn't going to do well. I remember personal story. When I was a teenager, I completely melted down in my senior year. I took all of the AP classes, honors classes. I had some PTSD come up and just rart, and there was a lot of chaos. And I had been doing really well with writing. I had been getting scholarships, and I had been working with poet laureates, and I had been doing a lot of things. And so writing was almost like I salted and burnt my own field. Like I put it aside because I didn't want it to get hurt with all of my personal flailing. And so I could have been writing and it could have been helping, but because I felt like the expectations were so high in what I needed to be creating, I wasn't able to first use it for myself because I was obligated to use it for others.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Golly.
So, yeah. I mean, and it should always be first for us. Like, I really feel like creativity is whatever restores to us a feeling, however temporary, of sovereignty. Like there should be sovereignty and ideally joy. And when I haven't been able to write, like quilting has been that. For some reason it's safe. And I can do it even if everything is terrible and I can make crappy quilts. Which nobody else seems to think are crappy. I think they are.
They're not. I mean, I know nothing about quilts, but I don't think they're crappy. I'm thinking about how for me, it has occasionally been a solace to write in a different form. It's like normally I typically write books, and I write poetry as well, but the poetry is more my personal stuff. I don't really pursue poetry is for me. It may not always stay for me, but for now it is for me. But it's been really healing to switch to writing like something like short stories or like braided fiction or narrative nonfiction, things like that have given me different spaces to exist when things feel hard. And I still have that sense of like my life feels out of control and I need to feel like a human again. And that writing gives me that chance to like really sink back into my body and exist in a way that feels more tangible, maybe
like recognizable, because it's nice to survival situations impact our identity. Like who am I when my circumstances are so different? Or when
I still me? Can I touch that part of me that's still there?
Right.
Yeah.
I
think it's the other thing that I was thinking of when you were talking is that I know this about myself, but that doesn't mean that it translates into daily practice. And I'm wishing during this conversation, I'm wishing that I had more of like an inspiring, just keep going, but I don't, because, we figure it out as we move. But I've talked about this before, that I have learned through all of my years of tracking NaNoWriMo specifically. And that's National Novel Writing Month, if any of you don't know what NaNoWriMo is. In all my years of tracking that, I realized like I have these ups and then I have these downs. And when I hit like day 13, 14, 15, I think my book is crap. I think I'm crap. I think the writing is crap. I hate the characters. I hate the plot. I hate everything. Everything. I hate it. And that is just part of the way that I move. And what I have learned is that when I go back and I reread, is I can't find those spots where I thought I was writing poorly.
Right. I think Neil Gaiman said the same thing.
Did he? Okay, well, I feel cool now.
Yeah, he said that his agent says, look, you always, like, he's always like, as if discovering it for the first time, I'm actually not meant to be a writer. This is terrible. And his agent's like, you always say that at this point in the process.
Yeah. So I think knowing your own process is really valuable for that, because if you do have to show up and you do have to keep creating and you do have to keep writing, even when things are chaotic or bad or difficult or falling apart for you personally, if you know your own process and you know, like, okay, I'm at the part in this process where I hate everything. It is probably compounded by all of the things happening around me. But I know that if I just keep going, that eventually I get to the end. And that's not to say I'm not at all advocating for like, just push through and grit your teeth and like, no, that is not what I'm saying. If you know you need a break, take a break. But if you know that you can push through, if you're like, I have 5 emotional minutes that I can give to this project, if you can do that, knowing, even though I feel like what I'm writing is absolute garbage, that eventually you will come back to it and not be able to find the garbage. That to me feels so like a relief that I don't have to feel ready to do it in order to write stuff that is decent.
Like feeling good about our writing and writing are 2 different things. And I'm also hearing a lot of writing process as metaphor for just living process. Like there are some days you're not going to shower. That's okay. I have days where if I'm cleaning my house, it's sort of a, hey, I washed 5 dishes. It's better than none. That's okay. You know, this is how we get by. And it's fine if we can release the idea of we have to do everything. Like, not only do we have to have a certain kind of result, but we also have to have a certain kind of process that is performed. It's okay to not do okay. It's okay.
Golly, well, and especially if you're neurodivergent, like, and especially if you're in the beginning stages of understanding your own neurodivergence. We were talking about unmasking, I think before the call. We were talking like unmasking and the whole process that is unmasking and figuring out who you are beneath all of that. Like on the outside, if you looked at like the bird's eye view of my life right now, you'd be like, yeah, things seem like they're going pretty well. Like, rock on, good job, her. But then if you were to like actually get into my brain and like listen in on one of my therapy sessions, you would be like, oh, her inside world is like a really big mess right now. That your tragedy, whether it is incredibly visible to the outside world, moderately visible to the people with whom you interact, or completely invisible to anybody except you and maybe a couple dear friends who you trust, or maybe just you and your therapist, or maybe just you and your journal, or whatever. Those levels of difficulty, I feel like, can, especially if they're stacked on top of each other, the amount of emotional work that you have to put into just getting up can be the creation that you've done. And I think you can feel really good about that.
And I think most writers, I mean, I've gotten the sense when talking to other people in the community. I remember one time when we were at a conference and one writer was talking about how hard it was to create when he was in a time of a lot of self-doubt and self-loathing and depression. But he was able to get through, and he knew that his writing was really flawed, but his writing friends helped with, you know, alpha reading, beta reading, editing. And what an act of sort of self-love and other love it is to help somebody with when we create this artifact out of our soul, which, you know, even if you're writing like a quickie romance to market, there's still part of you in it. Like, it's still something we've made. You know, however much we want to remain emotionally distant, make sure business is business, writing can become unexpectedly personal. And I remember watching this writer get literally embraced by other writers, you know, because I think most writers get it. You know, we're used to creating stories out of our bits.
Yeah.
And sort of the more raw those bits are, often the more good they are at connecting with others, which is sort of what we're all craving, I think. What we're all
I
seeking.
agree. I agree. I think if you could have one big takeaway for the people who are listening here, I would say that the more honest you can be with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore the more honest your writing or your creation is going to be, then that's not to say that people will love it, but that an impact comes through. And if it makes other people uncomfortable, you've done a really good job. If it makes people be like, ooh, I hate that, that's still an impact.
Yeah.
And to say that even if it's not, quote unquote, the best thing you've ever quilted or painted or drawn or written or whatever it happens to be, you can still say, but it, do you see, like, you can still look at it and be like, I see my own raw feeling in it. I think that creation is maybe not the first thing that we get back, but I think it's one of the first things that we get back when we've been through an incredibly traumatic period. I think creation is one of the first things we get back, because we start to tell ourselves a story about what happened, why it happened, and how we moved through it.
Yes.
And there is an intense,
right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's an intense, it's like you've been coming out of a cave and the first rope that you have is created by you. And you can not necessarily, but like, oh, writing is going to solve your depression. That's not what I'm saying. But that it has the ability to zoom out and put you, like, to narrate to yourself. You create your own meaning through the story that you tell yourself. And if you're a creative person, it's probably not a very short jump from telling yourself to making something about it.
Yes. And something else that really helped me, because I had all of these expectations of success with externally verifiable success. Like I should have produced X amount of books, or it should have been read this much, or people should have liked it this much. And so I had the added weight when going through things of feeling like a failure for not producing that. And what really helped me was people saying that you can trust that process of survival. You can trust the process of life, that it's going to change how the stories that you're gestating all the time. That there are stories going on that are going to come out when they're ready, and that you will be a better storyteller for it. And I have absolutely noticed that people who have been through it, there is a certain quality to them, and there's a quality to their stories, especially if they are able, if they have reached a point of processing where they're able to be really honest about it and connect through it, and they're not hiding it from themselves or from anybody else. That
there's so much power in the honesty of it.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was able to connect with when I was reading, when I've read through things. Even escapist stories are different from people who have been through it, which I know from just reading author bios and going, wow, okay, they know what it's like to have gone through something. And so if you are going through it right now and you're like, yeah, I'm not making any word counts, nothing's happening. It is. What you're going through right now is a masterclass in connection eventually. And it really sucks right now, but you're not alone in it, even though through some of the hardest parts, we have to feel alone through a lot of it. But I think that when we've had to feel alone, for me, that's given me the impetus to want to help other people not to feel alone through writing, and I think that's one of the greatest things we can do for each other through storytelling.
I agree. And I think that there is great value to sharing your own stories, even if they're not like New York Times bestsellers, or you haven't written a whole autobiography or whatever. There is still an intense value to hearing the stories of, like, the people around you who you love. I'm thinking about the way that my grandfather, who passed away, I'm thinking about the way that he would tell stories. And he had a particular rhythm that he would start all of his stories with that would, like, stick him into that, like, okay, now I'm telling you a story mode. And you always knew when he was going to tell a story because he would start with like very similar phrases, or like something about his tone of voice would shift, and we'd all be like, "Oh, okay, it's story time. We're listening now." Not always very respectfully because we were still children, but that I think maybe we underestimate how much we are always telling stories,
Mm-hmm.
and how much we are always like we are meaning making machines as humans, and the way that we make meaning is through putting it into a narrative.
And meaning is how we survive.
Yeah. Meaning is survival. Yeah.
Yep.
It really is. Mm.
So if you're in a place where right now you can't really touch your writing, but maybe you're able to write in a journal, or gosh, color on an app like Tetris. Sometimes that's what we need to do to just keep having our brains feel okay, recognizing patterns that are safe to recognize through
Yes.
a lot of change and transition and loss.
Sorry, I don't mean to totally interrupt, but I'm going to totally interrupt with my Tetris hyperfixation, because did you know that there's been a whole bunch of studies about brains, and specifically brains with PTSD, and that Tetris is actually just as effective as helping with PTSD as like a whole bunch of different medications on the market. So just saying, if you are going through a really difficult situation, Tetris is a great choice.
You know what? Sometimes, and yeah, I'm gonna say it's okay. I know that there's a lot of, well, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be productive, which I'm always fighting that inner Calvinist, y'all. Playing a game, like go get on Baldur's Gate 3. Like, just be someone else for a little bit so that you can feel okay about being yourself, maybe.
Yeah, like it's okay to take distance. It's okay to do that. It's okay to dissociate. Like it is, it is a survival mechanism. Like our brains are like that is a feature. It's not a bug. It can become a bug, but it's a feature. We're meant to be able to dissociate in a way that is healthy. Yeah, because you need the distance sometimes. You need to be able to back up and look at it from an outside perspective so that you can make that meaning. And even if the meaning you take away from it is, this is crap, there is no meaning in this, that's still a meaning. That's still a meaning.
Pema Chodron, she is a Buddhist nun. She follows Tibetan Buddhism. And she says, we all take refuge. And if you just say, okay, I am taking refuge in a Netflix binge, I am taking refuge in
That's
World of
such
Warcraft.
a lovely way to say it. I'm taking refuge.
And then we can go and we can survive by sitting in the feelings and processing them, but sometimes we take refuge too. It's okay to find wayside inns to spend time in. So maybe it's time to get creative with the way you're surviving. It's maybe if you're like us, maybe you needed a little nudge of somebody saying it's okay to go ahead and do what you need to do to get by.
Yeah.
Be creative with that for a while.
Mm-hmm. For a while, actually, I made a goal for myself. And again, this is high capitalism. But I was having a hard time writing. And so like I had like 3 or 4 different stories that I'd kind of started, and then they'd all kind of stalled out, and none of them were feeling sparkly to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the middle of winter too, which is a really hard time for my own seasonal depression. I just right into the ground. And so I decided instead that I was just going to color. I literally, I have a pack of markers, like cheapo Crayola dollar markers that I found like on sale at Target or something, and a coloring book. And it was wild. It is still wild to me how much just the act of making something, it did not matter what it was. I'm like on my little kids, like Paw Patrol, here, coloring book here. And then when I was done coloring that thing, the amount of like, oh, look what I made, like the way that I felt myself come back alive from coloring felt to me like, oh, I don't have to be writing necessarily to feel like me. All I need to do is make something.
Right.
A loaf of bread or coloring or origami or a note to a friend, or anything, any number of anythings. So it's okay to tap in real slow. And it's okay to go back to like the very most basic. It's okay if the only thing you create is you whistled along to Black Eyed Peas in your kitchen. Like, rock on. You did it. You did it. That counts. That counts.
I agree.
They might not pay your bills. Maybe if you record yourself whistling to Black Eyed Peas and then put it on TikTok, then maybe that will pay your bills.
And you know what? I mean, this sometimes was cold comfort to me when I was in the middle of being a single mom of 7 and I was needing to pay bills. But for all y'all out there, you deserve to survive. You know, even if your job isn't making it or you're not making it in your job, you still deserve to survive. And I just want to recognize sometimes circumstances are really intractable. They're terrible. Sometimes it just feels like a lot. So hang in there, because you deserve to survive and we want you to.
I want to underline that you deserve to survive too. Like, you deserve to survive in like the literal physical sense. Like, your body deserves to survive. You deserve to have food. You deserve to have a house. You deserve to have somewhere to live. You deserve to have clothing that is comfortable and weather appropriate and fits you and that you like. You deserve those things. Those are basic human rights. And you as a person, you as an individual, you as who you are on the deep insides, you deserve to survive too. And I think you throw yourself a lifeline any way you can. Yeah. And you shouldn't be shamed for that.
And creativity is a human birthright. So this is not something that we earn by writing something that is good enough or important enough or long enough. It's just something we do for ourselves and with each other.
I want to give everybody a phrase that you gave me, which is, you say this sometimes. I don't know if you know how much I love it, but I have seen you say, I'm going to quilt about it. I quilted about it. And I think about that all the time, that when I'm in the middle of processing something, my trauma response, when things are hard, my trauma response is to hide and to hold as still as humanly possible and to not make anything. And I think about that often. The other day, my kids were having a hard time and I was like, you know what? Why don't we bake about it? Why don't we make brownies about it? And we did. And something about making something through your strong feelings. I don't know what the magic is, but there is something there. You quilt about it.
I think it's the metronomic quality of it. I think it's the cadence. Because remember the Sisters Nagoski, Burnout and Come As You Are, they talk about the neurological, what survival looks like on the neurological level, that our brains are convinced that we're being chased by a tiger. Mm-hmm. And so what do? We need to do something to be like on the outside. We have to go from the outside in and tell our brains, hey, I get it. We're in danger. We're going to run for 20 minutes. Look, we ran away. We're cool. And now we're calm and we're breathing slowly. So there's something really nice about finding whatever activity it is and just creating a cadence where it's a measured response. This is something we do when we're calm. This is something we do when we're okay. We're baking,
because
we're quilting.
On a neurological level, my brain doesn't know the difference between like hiding from a tiger or sitting on the couch and watching Netflix with a blanket over my head. It feels the same to my neurological. I am sitting very still. I am being very quiet. My body might not necessarily know the difference. But I'm not going to make brownies if a lion or a tiger is chasing me. I'm not. And so something about that physical movement does something for your body and connects stuff back up.
I love the idea of gallows humor, and something I got from Japanese culture, because, you know, Obachan and my dad's Japanese and everything, is the idea of laughing away the demons.
Oh, I love that.
And I don't know if any of you have seen my favorite movie ever, My Neighbor Totoro, but there's a scene when they're all taking their evening bath and they're worried about the soot sprites and the demons in the house. And so they start laughing and splashing. And so there's something that is so beautifully defiant about having joy, you know, that it's very declarative of who we are, and that circumstances can be what they're going to be. We're still going to seek joy, whatever it is. even Tetris. Especially
Even Tetris.
Even Tetris.
Seriously. Go look up. I will find that research thing and I will link it in the show notes because it blew my mind.
That pattern. It feels good to have patterns. It feels good. I really liked your when you talked about tracing a novel. Maybe this is a good time. Everyone, if you're struggling with writing and you're in survival mode, but you want to have written and you want to feel a little better, maybe it's a good time to longhand copy a book that you really love so that you can just train your brain in
so smart
the pattern. You know, just have a little break and have something that goes a little slower.
Take care of yourselves, please.
Yep.
Our dear people. We care about you. Okay. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
This has been Rough Drafts Welcome.
Thank you so much for listening.
Got any questions? We would love to hear them. Got a complaint? We'll hear it too.
Yep. Leave us a 5-star review. Pretty please, and thank you. And if you want to book with Salt and Sage Books or learn anything else about what we do, or if you want to work with us or take our courses or blah, 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 you can find us at www.saltandsagebooks.com, and we're all over social media too.
We sure are.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.